if your parents watch certain shows, take a character from that show and ask them, have you ever thought to yourself, man, if I were X character, I would have done this. D&D lets you do that.
Yes.
It's
if you want to
true.
play Nightcrawler, you can do what Nightcrawler would or would not do.
We can't just cold read that everybody wants to be Nightcrawler just because 3 out of 4 people on this call.
Everybody wants to be Nightcrawler.
Your parents are watching X-Men Evolution.
I don't feel like
every
we're
night.
skewing the results at all. I think this is a certainty, and I feel very confident saying that the Kurt Wagner effect is very, very real.
100% of responders polled.
They're pulling up Disney Plus to watch the Fuzzy Dude, and all they want to do is be him.
What are the X-Men if not just D&D characters in a modern era?
Hello and welcome to a very special Dungeons & Dragons bonus episode of the Overly Sarcastic podcast, Bogarting Blues Roll. I am Indigo, and I'm joined today by a bunch of cool people. Say hi, people.
Hello.
Hi, people.
Hello.
I'm usually here, so this isn't as weird as it could be, but these other guys
Who is that?
Whoa, is that Red from Overly Sarcastic Productions here on the pod?
Phantom of the podcast.
No, that's Red of Rolling with Difficulty, actually.
No, it's Red from Heart of Elynthi, guys.
Ooh, oh my gosh.
Well,
what's that? Never heard of it.
There's a... I heard the DM is really handsome, though.
Oh my god.
Now, which one are you talking about? On which one was you talking about?
Oh, boy.
Well, now that we've sort of given the game away and that all of us play on Dungeons & Dragons actual plays largely with each other, we're going to be talking all things D&D and TTRPG on this bonus podcast today, answering questions that you guys submitted over in Ask OSPod. And to kind of kick it off, before we get to any of the questions proper, I just want to kind of go around the table and say a little bit about who you are and your experience with Dungeons & Dragons. For example, I am Indigo. I play Dungeons & Dragons. I'm typically a player on the actual play Rolling with Difficulty. I've got a lot of TTRPG at home experience. I actually started on Pathfinder, which makes me feel a little bit sacrilegious to be on the show. But I enjoy rolling some dice. I'm a forever bard, and Bane of Austin's Existence is a title that I'm kind of aspiring to. So I think that's where I'm at. Red, who are you?
We gotta get you a custom shirt that says Bane of the DM's Existence.
That would be awesome. If anyone wants to get that fan art on my desk by Monday, that would be great.
Yes, hello, I am Red. I am a second-generation D&D player. My parents were playing AD&D back when it came out, and I was introduced to D&D 3.5 when I was like 9, so that was my one true game system. I still think 5e has too many corners sanded off, too much focus on game balance and everybody kind of being the same strength level, whatever, it's fine. I am mostly a forever player. I've DM'd one shot and it was super fun, but it also like anime super attack knocked me out for like a month straight afterwards, so I want to get back into it, but I gotta like build up my muscle memory first. And I used to mostly play like Rangers and Rogues, but recently I've been trying to play something new and weird every time because I think it's more exciting to sort of branch out and, throw myself into weird other things as fun little challenges to make the RP and the game mechanics more exciting, which means I never know what's going on. But that's a problem for the DMs. Speaking of the DMs...
Who shall go first? Shall we roll off?
Oh,
I was just waiting for the producer to tell us, honestly. Can we roll
okay.
off? I have a dice right here in front of me.
I do as well. Here, let's roll
amazing.
off.
It's only appropriate that we do a roll-off, yeah.
Find my D20. I always keep... My desk has like a little tray that comes out, and that's where I keep all my dice, Red. This is the dice that I roll when I run. But I got my D20 ready. All right, let's see.
All right, here we go.
Roll
Oh,
this.
sick.
the tension.
I got a 2.
I got a 6.
Nice. All right.
Rolling about as well as I roll
baby.
when I'm DM.
The single digits. You go, Austin.
Oh, thank you. Well, giving the game away, thank you, Joe, Mr. Cat. I'm Austin, and I am the GM on Rolling with Difficulty, the actual play podcast. My D&D credentials, I might be the most newbie of all of us, actually. I started playing in 2018 as a player, and I've been, I will say, to my credibility, I think I've played D&D or at some TTRPG maybe every week since I started in 2018. There have been very few weeks where I've missed because between the the game that Indigo and I were in together when we were both at school, between the game that I had at home, and between Rolling Difficulty now. There's a lot of games I got going around. So I have played often, and I think probably still the bulk of my time is as a player, but the last 2 years have definitely shifted. It's been mostly GM for the last 2 years or so, I'd say, and we've been doing our podcast for 3 years now, I think, right? We just finished season 6, so 3 years of podcasting, which is actually sick to think about.
All right, and JoCat, tell us your credentials.
My name is JoCat. I am an online content creator. I make content about various different nerdy topics, but also some random animations that oftentimes have nothing to do with the topics that I'm known for. And I have been playing Dungeons & Dragons for, approaching 8 or 9 years now. I first started when I was in college, which would have been 2016 or 17, something like that. So it's getting up there. I used to consider myself a pretty new player to the scene, but now I guess I don't know. Yeah, it's coming along, and I would consider myself pretty 50-50 in terms of player to DM. Like, I'll usually DM like a big old game, and then be a player for a long time, and then DM another big game after like inspiration comes again, with little games sprinkled in here and there. I don't have that many games under my belt as a game master. But Red, you mentioned something about in terms of balance. Don't you worry. I have lots of things to say about 5e.
Yes.
Especially in regards to the new 2024 version of 5e coming out, and also just trying out other tabletop things.
Awesome. Well, we've got many questions relating to all versions and all systems, so we'll jump on into those. Our first question coming from Tunnel Gremlin to all: what was your first D&D character like? The first one you ever rolled up to a table with. What's their vibe?
Might as well ask us what's the most embarrassing memory from high school.
Ooh. I have I can't remember which of these was first. Oh no, because they were both.
I'm prepared. I tell you right away.
Yeah, you can
I'll keep it short and sweet. My very first character was in D&D 5e. It was my first game. He was a tiefling paladin by the name of excuse me. I almost said the same thing. The wrong thing. His name was Wirt. And Wirt Wagner, because I desperately wanted him to be Nightcrawler. I desperately wanted to play Mechanically, he was not Nightcrawler. There was no teleporting. There was none of that like stealth or anything. He was a paladin, but I desperately wanted to play Nightcrawler character, and I got somewhat bullied by someone who was very educated about D&D at the table into taking the quote optimum choices, and became a very mean character, and then he died. He also had a 13 strength. I was a paladin with a 17 intelligence and a 13 strength, because I was like, I want to play someone smart. It was a blunder of epic proportions.
Your optimizing power gamer teammate let you do that?
Well, when we did character creation, there was a lot of people he was trying to keep eyes on.
I see. He snuck that one by.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think he tried to get me to play Bard, and I was like, too much. Full spellcaster couldn't be.
Who would play a Bard at this table?
Yes. My first character similarly was also kind of suboptimal. His name was Rat. I don't remember his original name. I just used a kind of random name generator, but his nickname was Rat. That was like in his backstory. And he was a rogue, because in my brain was like, rogues are the cool suave types, right? Like Flynn Rider and all that, the dashing rogue. When in reality, I was yearning for Bard, but I didn't see Bard as a viable thing, because Bards are silly, Bards are meme lords, Bards are stupid. I don't want to be a Bard. I want to be a rogue with a high charisma. And similarly to you, Austin, like his stats were distributed kind of weird. And but eventually, I rebranded him to be a little bit more of a character. He was most definitely quite the self-insert to begin with, but now I feel like I've given him a lot more, because I've replayed him more and more, rebranded him as a bard as I've gone on. But I still consider him like very near and dear to my heart, and he's my go-to character when I play RPGs. His real name is Victor Quibbles now.
I'm running into the problem that the first character I made was 19 years ago. So I don't remember her name, but I do remember the context. My dad was like, I'm going to be running a game of D&D. Would you like to play? Because at the time my dad was playing with his crew of college friends and my mom, and like just, you know, they'd been playing games together since actual college, and they were like, yeah, you're old enough to understand what's going on. Do you want to play? And I was like, yeah. It was a very non-standard D&D game. I because they'd been playing together for a while. I think they were kind of like, we're not going to play rules as written. I've come up with these cool ideas. Like session 1, we accidentally exploded the world, literally. We broke a wizard tower that turned out to be holding the universe together, and then we were kind of just spell jamming through the shattered remnants of the multiverse for the rest of the campaign. And this is why my dad was like, you can play any of these templates you want. Do not worry about level adjustment. And I was like, there's this thing called a half celestial. Can I play that? It's got a level adjustment of +4. And he was like, sure. So I had a flight speed. I had like a heavenly celestial bow. I was like I think that was a multi-classed ranger rogue, because I was doing like teenage elf rebellion, because my backstory was that like my parents were like this like wizard and this celestial, and they were like, oh, we would make the coolest baby together, and we've got such ideas for her. And I was like, I don't like your plans, parents. I'm gonna go off and be edgy and have a bow and do ranged combat instead of sorcery or whatever. So that was interesting. I don't remember if much came of that. I did eventually encounter both parents and was not really impressed. But yeah. And then after that, I got to play a teleporting werepanther, so I got to actually play a Nightcrawler type. But that's okay. You know, it's not a competition.
Hell yeah.
The true aim of every TTRPG player is to somehow play Nightcrawler, I think, is the secret takeaway. Because we played a Marvel RPG, Red, Austin, and I together very briefly, and also desperately trying to just have the power set of Nightcrawler, and that was my move. So
We're doing a similar small adventure in a different system, and Red is playing a fuzzy teleporter.
Well, I didn't know he was fuzzy at the time. I was like, I'll be an elf, and then they released the art for the elves, and they're basically bat people, and I was like, Jesus, okay.
It's like how everything turns into crabs eventually. All TTRPG characters turn into Kurt Wagner.
Yes.
Carcinization, Kurtzinization. No.
There's something there.
Yeah, you had something. You planted some seeds.
Oh, she's on to nothing. And the crowd goes away.
My first, technically I did start with Pathfinder, but my first D&D character was in high school, so it was an edgy ranger, an edgy drow ranger. I didn't fully grasp that ranger meant ranged weaponry was sort of like the optimal move, so I had a big sword, and my whole goal was like, I want to go around and slay a bunch of dragons, because that's in the name, so surely we'll fight a ton of these. And I remember liking her. She was angry at the world and bad at hitting in combat, so those two things combined made for some great RPG moments. But pretty.
You built a drow ranger who specialized in melee combat.
Yeah.
So you accidentally rederived Drizzt.
Yeah, I was gonna say Drizzt. Yeah.
I wanted to smash Aragorn and Legolas together and see what would happen.
Yeah, there you go.
Would do it, yeah.
And to be fair to you, ranger doesn't necessarily mean range as in, ranged combat.
Yes.
It is supposed to refer to the range of, terrain. And I feel as though modern D&D has given it sort of an identity crisis, because rangers should be able to do melee with big sword, but I feel as though
rangers famously had 2-weapon fighting as their main thing, at least in 3.5, where it's like you hit them and then you hit them again.
Yeah, because what they're supposed to be is kind of the cross between the fighter and the druid in a way, but it's just kind of, I don't know, they've never really carved out a niche for it, because both fighter and druid and rogue can kind of do what ranger does, but a bit more specialized.
Yeah.
It's because the style of play that they are built, so 5e is such a legacy game that they include a lot of stuff that's from previous editions, there's tons of things in there, including assumptions about style of play that people just don't really play with anymore, and there's often not even really support for it. And I think that Ranger is the best case example of that. It's a class that is developed to be about the exploration pillar, and the exploration pillar is not really built out in 5e. Fair enough, people don't really play that way. Don't waste your time with it. Don't bother, creating a whole supplement of rules. People won't use it, probably. Some people will, obviously. That's their thing. But It's just not the way that people kind of imagine playing D&D. It's not the way that's played in a lot of our actual plays, which means that's not the way that it's played by a lot of people at tables who learn to play by watching those actual plays. And as a result, that means that the rules that the Rangers get about exploration have to suck because there's no support, and then the Ranger subsequently sucks. It's just this cascade of decisions that all come from 5e has to appease everyone, new people and people who were playing for 30 years and were pissed that they made an edition that worked.
Those are the corners that Red referred to being sanded down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, because the thing with 3.5 is that they really went for the thing that, like, if everybody is ridiculously over the top, then it'll kind of balance out anyway. And 5e, sort of, from my experience, has done the opposite, where it's sort of smoothed over everything. Any class that was too specialized, they were like, we're going to get rid of that. It's like, you can now be a warlock, but you don't need to have a demonic or devil patron. You can be a warlock with, like, a fae or, like, a celestial patron. You don't need to be an edgy warlock. And then, like, you can be a paladin, but you don't need to also basically be a cleric. You can be a paladin without worshiping a god. And it's like, that's fine. It's an interesting way to approach it. But the end result is that everything sort of gets mushed out into this weird Venn diagram where all of the classes have strong overlap. It's like, you want to be a fighter who's a bard? College of Swords bard. You want to... I don't remember many of the other subclasses, but like in 3.5 you did that with prestige classes. You hit level 10 in one main class, you can start taking levels in a prestige class. A level 10 rogue can start taking levels in Shadow Dancer and start teleporting around like Nightcrawler. And so it meant you had this ridiculous high level play. There was an epic level handbook for you to play past level 20 with like spells past level 9 that were just like, this is the fuck you grenade. It levels the entire battlefield and kills everybody, because at that point everyone is running around with godlike powers. But that's kind of hard to manage. And it seems like 5e was just like, nope, cut that off at the knees. Yep. You're never going to reach level 20. You're probably not going to reach level 15.
Oh, seriously, yeah.
And so why they brought the prestige classes, i.e. archetypes, down to such
3.
an early place.
Yeah.
And if I may, I know there's more questions, but just to put the period on the end of that sentence, Red, you said mushed it, and I think that's like exactly correct. I think the best thing you could compare 5e to is maybe like oatmeal. And it's like, oatmeal's not bad. I like oatmeal. If I was making breakfast, if I was making breakfast for 100 people, I'd probably whip up some oatmeal, right? I could make a lot of it, and everyone would go, oh, all right, yeah. But if I was making breakfast for, like, my 5 close friends, I would probably do something a little more tasty and hard work involved and
something with some more flavor.
Oatmeal, you know?
Yeah, you get their specific egg orders and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
Yeah. Well, we've got more questions to get to. This one comes from Bisexual Taliri Girl. To all, I recently finished listening to Season 1 of Rolling with Difficulty. It's the first anything related to D&D, including playing the game, that I've consumed, so it's safe to say that it's gotten me interested in D&D. The question is, what was it that got you into D&D? So what was it that brought you into the space? And I guess if D&D was not your first, or if you played other games that have kind of helped bring you in, like what got you into TTRPGs in general?
I've already answered this question. My parents were playing a home game every Saturday since before I was born, so I just kind of knew that was a thing that happened.
Very similar to Red. My dad played D&D, like a D&D back in his day, and so at some point he sat down with his children. He's like, we've assembled enough people to have a party, and we picked up like a Pathfinder beginner's box and played a couple games. And then later in high school, I had some friends who wanted to sit down and do our own campaign, and that's when I jumped into D&D proper. So for me, it was just sort of a natural evolution of, well, I'm already doing this thing, and I've also somewhat gotten grandfathered into sitting down and rolling dice.
Bunch of D&D Nepo babies at this table. It's great.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, I was not a Nepo baby. I discovered D&D organically, and by organically, as organically as you can for one of the biggest pop culture activities, recreational activities that you can find. But me and some friends
up with Big B's bootstrapping hand.
Yes, me and my friends, we're already pretty nerdy, and we had heard of D&D, but none of us had ever played. So we were just walking through some woods by our college school, and we were just talking about, hey, if you were a fantasy character, what would you be? And then we were all talking to like, oh, I'd be this, I'd be a battle mage. Oh, I would be a rogue. I would be a bard. All that stuff. And we were like, what if we just played D&D? What if we finally learned what D&D is and learned how to play? And then that summer, after we got home from college, we learned to play together, and it was almost kind of like all of us starting at the same time, except for one. His name is Ian. He had played before, but he was still very, very new. He had only played like one character before. So being the most experienced, he was our DM, and I started out as a player. And and it kind of sparked some kind of inspiration in me, because I feel like the significance of D&D to me is not just how I started, it's what kept me playing, and that's just the characters, interacting and being a part of your own show and getting so invested in the story and the characters and their interaction that it like almost reinvigorated my artistic kind of side to draw all these things, draw these characters, draw the situations that they're in. And that's what kept me going. It's like it really, really inspired me to make more art.
Yeah.
Mine is more similar to JoCat than to the other ones. This was 2018, and my now fiance, but we were not dating yet at the time, Victoria, her older brother, who is now a good friend of mine, but I didn't know it all at the time, decided he had played years ago and he really wanted to run for some people, and so she got myself and a bunch of our friends together, and he started running for us. And it was spurred by his desire and by my one friend Melvin, who was the power gamer that I talked about before. I've never seen a more busted character than a Melvin character, which is combined with his mighty ability to roll so many 20s. It's sick. It's sickening. Anyway, I'll tell more Melvin stories at some point, I hope. Anyway, his desire to play and Zach's desire to run, and then we all got together, and I really just fell in love with it. Obviously, was already very nerdy, but I think what really caused me to love it was I love comic books. I think comic books are kind of like my base art form. That's kind of, if I had to go to the center, that's where it starts, and it really let me live out that hero fantasy kind of thing. And I've been addicted ever since. I can't stop. It's a sickness. Someone take my dice away, please.
Yeah, I like that the common thread is we all played a game and then we're like, oh, more of this, please. Yes. Let's keep this going.
I like this.
What's funny is I have explained to my dad what I do several times since then, and then a couple of years ago, even after I started the podcast, my dad goes, "Oh yeah, I ran D&D for my brother when we were young one or two times." And I was like, "Boy, I've explained this to you so many times, and now you're telling me you played it?" I was like, classic, my dad kind of thing. But I do also have the father, but he only did it for a couple of weeks, I think, and then stopped. And I have no idea what the quality might have been, considering again he does not seem to know what it is.
Well, sort of a related question to, since we have so many familial relations to Dungeons & Dragons here, from Luinator to all, my parents have no understanding of role-playing games, and they can't grasp how I'm willing to spend 4 to 8 hours every 2 weeks to play this weird D&D thing. How would you explain the appeal of D&D or other RPGs to someone who is completely foreign to this sort of game?
I'm sorry, clarification question. 4 to 8 hours or 48 hours?
4 to 8.
Okay.
Yeah, 428. 428.
If this question was, how do I explain that I play Dungeons and Dragons for 48 hours straight every single week, I think I'd have to have a serious conversation with the
good
listeners.
luck. I got no answer for you, man.
I do have a follow-up question after we're done answering this one, actually,
Ooh,
for each of you.
Ooh.
But I would say the easiest way to explain D&D to someone who has no idea what it is it's improv playing pretend with some rules. That's it. That's all it is. In fact, there's a great video that I saw. I don't remember. I wish I could remember who it was. Explaining D&D to, I think, some sort of singer or rapper or something who had never heard of had never realized. And then she just started having them play it right then and there. She's
it was Deborah Ann Wool.
Yes.
Oh.
Deborah Ann Wool of Daredevil with the guy who was the Punisher, John Bernthal.
Okay, yeah, so not a singer. My
It's the
mistake.
fastest I've ever thought of two names.
Yes, but she just starts... They just start playing D&D right then and there in a small, very simplified way, where she's just like, okay, you're in a field or blah, 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 and she just starts explaining it, and she asks him, what do you do? And he just goes, oh, I guess I would do this, and that's it. That's playing D&D. It's playing pretend in your head, using your imagination to... I personally like to describe it as being a part of your own TV show. Like, you are the character in your own TV show, and you get to act out your thing, and there are rules to it so that it's not just completely improv, There's ways you can fail and make mistakes.
Yeah, it definitely scratches the same itch as like a playground RP, or it's like, we're going to play Star Wars today. I'm going to be General Grievous and you're going to be anybody else.
Yeah.
And like D&D, gamifies it in that it turns it into a thing with rules, like you said, because the bane of every, pretend play game is, well, I'm going to use my everything proof shield. It's
Yes,
like, no,
exactly.
you can't do that. And this is like, well, let's see if you can do that. Roll a die.
Yes. It gives you the rules you need for the parts that you can't just imagine into existence. Like, it's like, okay, I don't know how fast an arrow flies. I don't know how accurate I would be with a sword, but I can roll a dice for that, and I can do the make-em-ups around it to tell the story, which I would say is probably the biggest selling point of D&D, and at least in the current sense. It has long legacy roots as a dungeon delver. It's more of a war game, and it has evolved into 5e and now the 2024 edition, which are definitely geared more towards the actual play brand of like, we're telling a collaborative story. But I personally like to consume stories and tell stories, so for me and for many others, I would say the appeal is that you get to sit down with people who you enjoy and tell a story together. With, as mentioned, the guide rails to tell it. Yeah. Also, if you've ever played mermaids as a kid, like, this is for you, right? This is the equivalent of asking, 3 to 5 of your closest friends to go hang out with you in the pool and play mermaids as an adult. It's great.
I don't know that I have anything new, but I'm going to contribute anyway. I would say one of two things, which is, if you want to be pithy, it's the most fun you can have with your brain. Credit to Matt Colville for that one. I stole that one. It's not mine. But
I love Matt Colville.
my own way of describing it, I would say D&D lets you play the main character in a story, and you can describe whatever, heroic fantasy or dark fantasy, whatever you want to describe it as to your parents that you're trying to sell it to. And it lets you play the main character of your own creation in this story, and there are rules that arbitrate what you can do, what you can't do, and what you might be able to do. That gives us some constraints to play in, so you can make the decisions, but there's some constraints. And when you get to that may be able to do category, there are dice that add randomness and stakes, and so it kind of gets that little like gambling kick. You can push your luck and try to do these things that are not guaranteed. And depending on how your parents feel about gambling, you leave out that part. But if people who play poker understand the rush of that it's fun to make bets. It's fun to take a chance, to take risk, and that's what the dice is there for, to give you risk.
Yeah, I think that's good. Oh, I want to add one more thing. If your parents watch certain shows, take a character from that show and ask them, have you ever thought to yourself, man, if I were X character, I would have done this? D&D lets you do that.
Yes.
It's
If
very
you want to
true.
play Nightcrawler, you can do what Nightcrawler would or
And
would
we
not
know
do.
they
You can't just
do.
cold read that everybody wants to be Nightcrawler.
Everybody
just 'cause 3
wants
out
to
of
be
4
parents are
Nightcrawlers
watching
are-
X-Men
I
Evolution
don't feel
every
like we're
night.
skewing the results at all. I think this is a certainty, and I feel very confident saying that the Kurt Wagner effect is very, very real.
I mean, what
100%
are
Pulling up Disney
responders
Plus to
bold.
watch the fuzzy dude, and all they want to do is be him.
the X-Men if not just D&D characters in a modern era?
But again, more in another point for 3.5, because the power scaling of any given team in the X-Men universe is wildly inconsistent. It's like,
Well,
we've got the one who can shape all of the weather, and we've got this guy who's very heavy, and it's like, okay, I don't know, man.
We're going to have a very, invulnerable metal skeleton man with claws in his hands go up against a guy whose tongue's a little long.
Or we're going to have him go up against the guy who can move metal with his mind, because that never goes badly.
Yes.
Ever.
That's-
Especially not every issue.
That's the secret to throwing the appropriate villain against your X-Men team, which rocks. But also the secret to DMing a fun combat encounter is throwing
Yes.
the villain or monster that has a cool gimmick or a gimmick that your team is unprepared for against them to make them kind of think outside the box. The
Anti-magic
X-Men are
field against
secretly
a party
great
of
analogy
3
for Dungeons and
casters.
Dragons.
Anti-magic field on a party of 3 casters rocks.
Ooh. I think that's famously why beholders are such a pain in the ass to fight, because most of the higher level damage dealers are going to be spellcasters, and one of the eyeballs is just the nope field.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I did have a follow-up question.
Yes.
What's the
Yes.
longest game of D&D you've played? Longest session of D&D?
Ooh, longest individual
like
session?
hours, like start the
Hours,
watch.
yes. Mine is 11 because it was like the one time that we got together to play because we were all busy with college and we don't always get to meet up and we were all in different states. So this is our one chance to play for who knows how many more months. So it was all day. We played literally all day into the night.
My answer is so tame in comparison. It's probably like 5 or 6 hours because, again, most of the games I played were like with my parents and their college group, so they'd already
Yeah.
gotten the 11-hour games out of their system. And now I mostly play on podcasts where it's like if this goes over 4 hours, our editor is going to die. Hi,
Yes.
I might explode.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think similar to Red, like I think I've had maybe one session that might have hit 8 hours, where we maybe had one weekend where it'd been a while since we played, so we did kind of like 2 adventures back to back, took a little lunch break in the middle. But for the most part, I was playing in high school, in which case we had like homework and bedtime, and then in college we had get drinks and then pass out. So there's kind of been a balancing act for most of my gameplay. So I'm usually averaging 4-ish hours, but I've had 1 or 2 longer sessions in there. But I don't think I've ever quite hit 11. You got me there, Joe.
No, I think
So
I have
much
to
sun
cede.
down, baby.
I think I have to cede the crown the crown to JoCat there. I wish I had timed it, but I can almost certainly tell you what the session was, which was we every year we go to like a little cabin thing that we call D&D weekend, and we spend many days there. And every year we play less and less D&D, but the first year we went, it was during our biggest, longest campaign and one of our biggest combats that we've been looking forward to for actually years because we play the campaigns in the same world. So it had been this thing that had happened to this one character years ago in another campaign. We're now coming back to fight this legendary Kraken, and so we saved that fight for D&D weekend. And yeah, I want to say it was probably about 8 hours of play. At least 3 to 4 of those were the final Kraken fight, and that was pretty epic and legendary. It was basically like an underwater dungeon crawl and an epic fight. And yeah, I want to say about 8 hours, but it was years ago, and I did not time it, and also it ended at like 3 in the morning, so I was mostly lost touch with reality at that point.
Very cool.
Heck
We're
yeah.
running the full spectrum of possible time limits here. We've got more questions to get to within the current time limit of the podcast. This one comes from
Yay.
Cab. To all, you've mentioned that you play D&D. I'm trying to get better at roleplay and would love some advice. What is your process for making player characters? How do you create things like the character's voice and personality, and what tips and tricks do you have for getting into and staying in character? So let's talk a little about the character creation process, whether that's a DM making an NPC or someone sitting down to make their player character that they're going to play for quite some time. How do you approach character creation?
Oh, man.
My goodness, I feel like I could do a whole separate dive.
Yeah, it's a very
diatribe
broad question.
On
of things
step
that
on
run
Red's
long.
toes, do a diatribe on NPC creation specifically. Like, to me, there's similarities, but they end up serving very different roles.
Yeah.
PC is the same advice I'd give to any DM who is like, how do I create an adventure? Which is take what you love and put it in the game, right? Like, what do you like? Play that. And when you start, and by the way, I don't know that there's a way to cheat around this. I think like most things, you have to start by being bad at it and just improve. So when you start that, you will just play Nightcrawler. You will just pick a character you love. And no, legit though, you will just pick a character you love and you will just try to play them. And you will be frustrated because the game is not set up to deal with most fictional characters and like how they, characters that succeed because they have determination and willpower and narrative power that propels them to victory. You don't have those, and so you're going to be really frustrated when your Wolverine character tries to intimidate someone and rolls badly, and that will be the lesson you learn. So maybe you can skip that first part, but then after that, you just start taking aspects of characters that you like, themes that you like about characters, specific personality traits and voices, and you'll start creating characters that are hodgepodges of a handful. Is my experience, and then you will, especially of yourself too. You'll start putting yourself into characters, and then you'll create characters that are of wholly unique worldviews from yourself, that ask questions based off of people that are based off of small side characters from things. And before you know it, the pieces that you have used to assemble your character are so disparate and small that no one could tell what puzzle they originally came from. That's kind of been my experience, and yeah, that's been my experience and method for it.
Yeah. The funny thing I've observed is that when I come up with a character that is a reference, because in the current season of Rolling with Difficulty, as soon as it was like, we're all going to be playing detectives, initially when we were spitballing ideas, it was like, everyone was like, oh, I want to play this archetype, I want to play that archetype, and I was like, I want to be Columbo. And the thing is, you guys were like, don't just play actual Columbo. And it's like, no, don't worry, because no character survives contact with the campaign. Like, a character, I think the thing that I usually do when I'm building a character is I start really, really simple. Like, just a few basic concepts. Like, okay, this character is really naive and new to the world, but is, like, eager to explore. Or this character is generally kind and slow and sees things fairly simply. I like giving myself a very simple prompt to work with, because that means I can make decisions faster. And in the space of RP, I find sometimes it's better to not overthink these things. But a character will gain a tremendous amount of complexity when exposed to a new situation. And the cool thing about D&D is that you put in the character, but the DM is the one controlling the world. So the situation is out of your control. Your only decision is how the character internalizes it and responds to it. And starting from a simple framework doesn't mean the character is going to stay simple when they start dealing with complex challenges. So every character I've ever played that has started off as like the most basic thing imaginable has become complex just by virtue of being exposed to things that I wouldn't have thought of or I wasn't prepared for. Because, I also like write, and this is a thing that happens when you write a character and put them into a story. You start from a simple premise, and then you're like, but I bet this character could become complicated if I put them in this situation, or this situation would show off this side of them that normally doesn't get shown. And the joy of a D&D game is that you only have to do half the work there, because you just need to decide how the character shows themselves off, given the situation that the DM has put them in. So honestly, recently I've just been starting with like a really simple premise, really simple core of like, I think it would be fun to play a character with like these 3 basic traits, and then I just absolutely go to town. And I will also usually draw them, because I don't get a feel for a character until I've drawn them. Because again, the thing about comics being like the one true art form for you, that's 100% true for me. It's always the thing I default to. So I need to draw like an expression sheet or a little 3-panel comic of the character moving around before I get a feel for who they are. And this also applies with like characters when I'm writing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An important jumping off note about Red saying, take that, keep it simple, like to heart. Because the biggest thing that I think some players worry about is having their character all figured out. And you really don't have to. You can figure it out as you go along, as you play the game. If anything, it's better to have room for them to grow and you to discover them as you play, because you're going to get into a situation where you're going to think, oh, I want my character to react to this situation like this, and there, boom, you have just built a trait for your character. And like a thing that they want and their ideals and stuff like that. One important note that I feel, it sounds like super obvious, like duh, but one thing you shouldn't do is make a character that would not be in this campaign. Like that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times players, me included, will accidentally make a character that is like either not invested in the thing that's going on from a character writing perspective, or they are just like, I don't know, lone wolfing it, or they feel as though it'd be more efficient to lone wolf it. Make a character, like if you feel as though there isn't a reason for this character to be here, either come up with one or make a new character.
But don't be afraid to give your character plot hooks that tie them into the campaign. One of the things I love doing in Austin, you can, say this is because this has come up with every character I've made, is like, I'll be like, I think there's a thing that happened in my backstory and I don't know what it is yet, but you get to decide. It's like, oh, I don't know what was up with the monastery that was raising me. I don't know how I got flung into Sigil from where I started off, that kind of thing. This is called donning the coat of plot hooks in my parents' home games, where you're basically just like, hey DM, do whatever you want, boss. I'm just here to make the story more exciting.
Giving your DM those can turn a good character into a great character. That's the collaborative storytelling bit of like between you and the DM.
Yeah.
I want to you guys said so many good things. I want to synthesize what JoCat said about leaving things open for your character, what JoCat said about playing a character that is relevant to this campaign, and what Red said about donning the coat of plot hooks. I want to synthesize those and say those are all true. You don't feel like, though, you always have to hit the ball to the GM. You can let the ball come to your court as well. In the current campaign I'm playing, I created this character somewhat last minute because that I'm playing in as a player, a home game, not rolling with difficulty. I created a character somewhat last minute, and I had a couple ideas. Basically, I had 2 ideas, and then the other 2 people showed up to the table, and they already had ideas that were so similar to my 2 other ideas. I basically had to be like, oh, what do I got? Like, what's back there? And so I came up with this character kind of last minute. And as the campaign started, and he had a good reason to be there, but not a good reason to care. I realized as I started, and then I thought, that's okay. A reason will present itself, and then I will pretend that has been my reason all along. I just need to keep it vague for now. And so you can totally do that too. You can do the opposite of the Red thing. But believe me, I like being surprised by the GM, but it's also fun to take it on yourself. And both to myself as a GM, it's like, it's meat and potatoes. You want both. If I only had one or the other, I'd have half a meal. So this character, I decided that they were from another world and they got sucked in. This is part of a planes hopping campaign. And I was like, okay, but why are they on this adventure? And I realized, they're on this adventure because they have an army waiting back home no one else knows about. And they're waiting for Wally. Wally's the GM. He knows. Say, Wally, if you're listening to this, you can't know. He's the GM. My brother, if you're listening to this, you can't know. When the opportunity arises, he's going to use the party that he's been traveling around planes with to open a door. This plane's going to bring the army through. He's going to warlord conquer it up. So I discovered after playing for a little bit, that was my motivation. My character knew it all along, but myself, Austin, did not know that until it presented itself. And now I have a hook into the campaign. So that's a great way to make a compelling character too.
Mm-hmm. I did want to highlight a thing that you've done a couple times in our Draw Steel home game. Like, we'll be fighting a thing and it'd be like, is this what did your tragic backstory? And the player gets to be like, yes, or no, it was somebody else, which is always fun.
Yes, which will, I mean, it depends on how much more we play it, but more conversation with you, Red, and I got to talk to Noir about his character as well and why he's there. And that's fun. Yeah, I like, and this is the thing I think that you can do that when it comes with trust and people are okay with taking on the authorship a little bit. You can ask, and I found those to be really powerful moments. Ask the players to decide something in canon right now. My favorite was asking Noir in Rolling with Difficulty, can Mechanites cry? He's played a robot character called a Mechanite. I said, can Mechanites cry, and do you? I think that was great. As if
Noir would ever answer no.
I mean, that's the thing too. Is we all know Noir, and I knew what he was gonna say.
Everyone's character should get to cry sometimes.
You can do that.
I think that this is all dancing around kind of the exact thing that I was going to say a little bit. When I'm designing a character, I like to make sure that they're either someone who will interact with the world in an interesting way. This was kind of the school of thought with like Danny in the first campaign, is like, she doesn't really have a code of plot hooks on, but I know that she will react to everything that's happening in a way that is engaged with the story, but also could potentially jump off into different directions. And if you're not going to play a character who you're confident, you can be like, oh yeah, I can interact with the world and kind of do this on the fly and build it as I go. Start with one fundamental thing that your character wants, whether it's the answer to a mystery, to find someone or something. Give them a very clear want, because they will be able to follow that through whatever story presents itself. And you can work with your DM or your GM to build your want into the campaign that you play. If it's finding a specific person, your DM or GM can help you find them along the way, but that will give you some direction for the character. But the other thing I want to highlight with character creation specifically is I think it's very easy to get into the impulse of, I am writing a character for a story, and like flesh out the whole story in your mind and kind of ignore the part where you're playing a game and there are things like stats and class. And so personally, I really like to start with, I know I want to play this subclass, and I kind of want, like, my favorite thing in the world is like, DM, if I don't roll a dump stat, I would like at least one negative stat, because I want to have built-in failure
negative stats
options.
Are great.
It's so good. You should have at least one that's negative. It makes the game very fun, and it makes you fall on your ass sometimes, but also if you're rolling with the punches, if the dice of it all is what you're in here for, and you are because you're playing a game, it does give you opportunities to really shine and really wipe out. But I think it's important to also think about, like, what do you mechanically want to be accomplishing? Are you playing a bard because you want to be giving out bardic inspiration? Awesome. what character would be a bard in your world? Maybe it's a traveling salesman. Maybe it's a noble who's very educated and has read a great many works of literature and studied the sword and is very, like fancy and proper. There's a lot of ways to build out from that class, but knowing what it is that you mechanically want to do will make it a lot easier for you to then make a character that accommodates that, and then when you're playing the game, you'll be doing the things that you wanted to do, which makes it a lot easier to then go and say, oh, okay, well, I can spend less time thinking about how I mechanically accomplish this and more time thinking about what would my character do in this moment, which just makes it easier to roleplay as you go. So don't forget that you are playing a game and the game has mechanics when you're doing character creation. As much as I love sitting there and making up 10,000 D&D characters in the Notes app that have intricate backstories, I don't know that I would play most of them because I don't know that they're mechanically interesting to me. So make sure when you sit down at the table that you consider all aspects of the gameplay experience.
Yeah, what I would say to sort of boil down the point I made with that point is that your character is going to be a tool through which you play the game and interact with the world, and in my experience, it is often beneficial to streamline that tool so it is very easy to use. A simple character premise, simple mechanics that you already know how to use, a simple call and response of like, this thing is what the character wants, this thing is what the character hates. The more complex it is, because again, I love a good 50-page tragic backstory. Love it to bits. Not probably going to be relevant in most of the game, and that can be disappointing if you write up the character and you already envision the 3-season drama with them as the star. It's like, that's not going to happen because you are playing pretend with a table full of other people and you aren't the boss.
Yeah, there's randomness involved.
Cat has just happened.
It's Ziggy. She's here. She's my most frequent Dungeons & Dragons guest.
Yes, amazing. But yeah, the general gist there is just that, like, your character, you can have a story in your heart that you want this character to play out. But if you're really set on that story happening, don't take them to the table. Write a book about them.
Yes.
They're different art forms. They're good at different things.
You don't want to bring like a royal noble who has reclaimed their kingdom and killed their rival and raised and caused a revolution and they're level 1,
That's the other problem, yeah.
The most interesting things that happen to your character should happen during the game, not before.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But needless to say, we could probably continue to... We could probably sit
it
here and
does
have
sound
done
like we
just
could
a
do that
character
one.
creation episode, so we're going to move on to another
like
question.
Austin said.
But,
Yes, next.
yes, this comes from Wolfheart. To all, if you could have any feats from D&D, which would they be and why? And I'm going to preemptively jump this one and say I would want the linguist feat because I want to speak all the languages all the time. And every time I've almost taken linguist in any actual D&D campaign, Austin has made fun of me.
Oh, that's a bad choice. My brother has taken it in the home game we're playing currently, though.
I love it, though, because then the character sheet
hasn't
lists all the
mattered.
different languages, and you get to have all the different tabs, and I get to go scroll through the little list and be like, ooh, look at all the things I could be talking to. But in real life, also, I would like to speak multiple languages, and I feel like that could be fun.
I'm going to steal that. That seems like the most practical one to have, like, in our world, because looking at all the other ones, they're, like, mostly combat-focused, like, alert, never get surprised. It's like, how often am I like ambushed by ninjas on a regular basis? Not very.
Which is the one where you can keep track of time perfectly and like always know what
Keen
north
mind.
is.
Oh,
Keen mind. That could be good.
It could be.
I mean,
Lots of
let's be
mobility
real.
ones.
The true correct answer is any of those feats that give you 1 or 2 cantrips. Because
I was going to say
Ooh,
Magic
yes.
Initiate
Magic.
is, I mean, Linguist is also extremely useful. Magic Initiate might be the, like, the power scaling best answer. Pick up guidance and what's the Druidcraft for wizards. Prestidigitation.
Yes,
Yeah.
prestidigitation.
Sorry,
so
I never
good.
play wizards. I always play druids.
in a real world practical sense. Actually, I'd like to change my answer to lucky.
Oh,
Three-
Lucky's pretty.
3
close.
times a day? Like, it's already so strong in D&D. Imagine that in freaking real life. I just can decide, like, 3 times a day, I want this to go right. Or try again.
Yeah,
pretty good.
it's kind of
It's
hard to
pretty good.
argue with any of those. It gets very power scaly. I'm not sure I have a
3-second
good joke
tries.
answer.
Very strong. Well, we're actually kind of inching close to time on this podcast, and I think we could probably
Could do a part 2.
stretch this last question out for quite a while. So I'm going to bring us to our final question of the show, but feel free to talk it out for quite some time on this one, because I'm sure we've all got thoughts. From Rambles to all, what is your D&D hot take? For example, I think clerics are better damage dealers than healers, or potions should be a bonus action, etc. That kind of thing. So what is your Dungeons and Dragons hot take?
Oh, crap. I'm sure I have.
Those
one,
are just
but-
correct, though.
Yeah,
I was gonna say,
well, such is the case.
potion actions as a bonus. Bonus actions as potions for. Holy crap!
Go on.
Someone else
Take it
talk
from the
for a
top,
minute.
roll
Hold
it
on.
back.
Someone else go.
I guess I mean I've been banging this drum since I had to stop playing 3.5. I do think that D&D is at its most fun when it is allowed to kind of cut loose a little bit and just go off the chain and actually turn into the sort of heroic power fantasy that it seems like it was at least at one point designed to be. And I guess corresponding to that, I think that low-level play in D&D 5e is frequently just unfun, which is not great because, like, a lot of the times we've done, like, a little home game one-shot, it'll be like, we're going to start at level, like, 7 or level 12 or something like that, so you have a lot to play with. Because there's, like, a jump between level 4 and 5, and before level 4, it's almost like there's barely any point. You're doing no damage. You're taking so much damage. And you have like one action and your movement is often not great. And it's interesting because it feels like that's intentional. Like you are supposed to feel very weak when you are low level so that as you grow stronger, you can feel the contrast. But in practice, I don't really think that effect happens because most players don't level up frequently enough to really feel that difference for more than like a few minutes at a time, where it's like, wow, I have an extra spell slot. I can do this one thing and it's gone. Okay, cool. Well, great. So the trade-off of like, you are so non-functional below level like 6, 5 depending on the class, I guess. Because I think every class has like, this is the level below which it is almost pointless to try and play this character, where it's like, once you get this specific, or like once you can start attacking multiple times per turn, or once you get this level of spells, the game really opens up. And before that, you just kind of have to like run around and try not to die and hope you don't roll badly, which is a thing that you risk every round. And the thing that this often translates into at low level play is that you are going to waste a lot of turns. And it's not going to be your fault. You're going to just try to do a thing. You're not going to roll high enough. And the end result is you accomplish nothing. And that feels so bad. There are a few, in my experience, the thing that nobody likes in a game is being prevented from doing anything. Like in a video game, when you get paralyzed, nothing makes you more angry than like, let me move. It's the reason why a lot of games will give you controllable helplessness instead. Like Twilight Princess, after you get turned into a wolf, you're stuck in a dungeon, but you can move around in a circle. You can move around. You're not stuck. That makes you feel a little better than if they were just like, no, no moving. So low-level play and that general feeling of, oopsies, I basically just lost a turn, those are not good feelings, and D&D has them in abundance, and it feels like they're trying to use them to counterbalance something, but that something seems to just be having too much fun, so I don't know.
Jumping off of that, at first I was like, I don't think I have any hot takes. I've got a lot of criticisms of D&D, but I think a lot of those criticisms are just pretty cold. Like most people have had these for a very long time, but one that I think is still very divisive and controversial is I personally believe there should be no way for a player's turn to result in nothing happening. Now that's pretty extreme, right? Because like that's the whole thing is sometimes your attacks can miss and you do nothing, and sometimes your spell can fizzle out. But like I have been in my games that I run removing every single thing that may cause a player to not do anything on their turn. Red, you may remember I changed how death saves work, where the player can still play. They're just on death's door. Like they're just, I don't know, have disadvantage on their stuff. They'll get an exhaustion point, but they can still act. They're just very close to dying. Because like you said, it's fun to play. And I have been playing other tabletop games and seeing more flaws in D&D, and one that I really like, although I do have criticisms for it as well, is the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop. And in that game, if you fail your roll, you still do something. You still deal damage, you still cause an effect, your spell still goes off, it's just less potent. And I firmly believe D&D would be better if it adopted something like that, where even if you miss, you do something, because nothing feels worse than you're a spellcaster and you use your turn to cast a big spell and the enemy counterspells, or you so happen to fail a saving throw and you're stunned and you just don't get your turn. And some may argue, oh, that's just consequences. Consequences of what? Building my character, having stats, and being unlucky? Like, I feel as though the consequences should be a result of your choices. And some may argue that that is your choice of building your character with certain stats that may be bad at certain things. But you as a player can't know what you're coming up against because that's the DM. You can't read the DM's mind, you know?
Yeah.
Unless the DM straight up tells you, it's like, hey, this is going to take place in the snowy mountains, so, you know, build a character that you feel as though would be fitting for this. Like, at that point, like, sure, all right. If you make someone who is more attuned to the desert and they have cold weakness, like, that's on you, like, after you've been told. But for the most part, when it comes to encounters, what the enemies can do, like, you don't know what they're going to do. You can't read the DM's mind. So, like, that's why I try to implement in my games almost AoE markers, like, oh, this thing is about to happen. Either move out of the way or something's going to happen to you. You know, here come the consequences. So yeah, that is my hot take. I feel as though turns where when you fail, nothing happens should be gone.
I like it.
I think that hot take, JoCat, I think you're perhaps cresting the wave of a movement that a lot more people are getting on. A lot more people are getting on that ship. We've been playing Draw Steel, and that is kind of the underlying is there's no such thing as the null result. When you act, something happens, and there's little thing, the thing you expected, or big awesome thing. It's basically the tiers. Occasionally there is thing you expected, big awesome thing, or bad thing. You know this bad thing, but you attempted it. You knew this was an option. You knew a bad thing could happen to you. You set yourself up because you knew there was something awesome that could have happened instead. I've in the time people have been speaking, I've written 5, and I'm obviously not going to say all of these. If there's more time, I'll circle back. But because it's relevant to what you were just saying, JoCat, you were saying that you don't like 0 hit points means people can't act, and I agree. I think that there's a lot of people who believe that healing is bad in D&D because it's cheap. Because at 0 hit points, 1 hit point and 1,000,000 hit points, you are just as effective. So there is the death yo-yo, right? There is they go down. Cleric casts Healing Word, they come up, they take their turn, they go down because they were at low hit points. People think that is a bug. I think that it is a feature because doing nothing sucks. And so I don't like this, oh, well, you come back up and you have a level exhaustion. I played that in a home game, and we literally played, I think, less than 1 session, and we said, guys, this is bad. Like, we cannot play this anymore. It's so unfun. Every time you go down and you come back up, you are weaker than before. It sucks.
It puts you in a
people
death
want to
spiral.
play their characters, and it might impact your narrative because, yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that someone was knocked out cold and then stood back up again, and was knocked out cold and stood back up again, that they would be okay. But this is heroic fantasy. That's how most people play the game, although the game is not explicitly that genre, D&D. It's heroic fantasy. People want to feel heroic, narrate it differently. That's the GM's job, right? Is to make that seem reasonable. And then I'll say 2 short ones, and I have more if we happen to have time. Second hot take is that character creation is a chore, and that's bad. I wish it was more fun. I don't know how to fix it, but I have friends who, to them, it is not a chore. It's a fun game, and they build so many characters. Their D&D Beyond has dozens of character, and they're like, this feat plus this subclass, I've had such a good idea for this, like, moves. I'm like, every time I have to make a character, and I'm scrolling through background and picking languages, I want to put an ice pick through my eye into my brain, which brings me to my last hot take, which is equipment sucks. Equipment is pointless. Your magic items obviously are important, but the difference between having rope and 5 pitons, no one can agree, and rations, no one plays the game that way. No. Let's just make source packs. You call it an adventuring pack, and then you list out all the things that are in it. Why can't you just say adventuring pack has all of the mundane essentials you would need for wilderness survival? I guess that would be an explorer's pack, but to that effect.
I feel like I agree with you on the fundamental level of it makes sense that a pack would just have whatever you need for that thing. Like, I think that is a smoother way to do it, but I'm exactly the kind of person who's like, well, my inventory says I have all these pythons. Let me think of a way I can use these items specifically that have been listed out in a situation. And that is something that I don't know that I would love to give up, even if I think objectively it is the worst version of using what is being presented to you.
There's a reason that's fun, and it leads to my fourth hot take, which is that the game is different genres at different levels, related to what Red said as well. At low levels, it is way more survivalist, and that's why you like having those things. And then at later levels, it's way more heroic and high fantasy, and characters have spells that why would you even need a rope at this point, and why would you need any of this stuff? And I find that kind of annoying. I think a game should be one genre all the way through, and I don't like. It's why people skip the early levels a lot, like Red was saying. It's why I believe, maybe I'm wrong about this, but in the new edition, they explicitly call out levels 1 through 3, or 1 and 2, as the introductory levels. Skip these levels if you are veterans. Go right to level 3, where you pick your subclass. Do not start at levels 1 and 2. Those are to teach people how to play the game when you have barely any options.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. I will say,
I think that's bad. I don't like that either.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the internal logic, but I do follow it. I will say the one benefit of having just a bunch of random bullshit in your inventory from your starting pack is looking through it, like Indigo said. The thing is, it's like an improv prompt. You're like, what am I going to do in this situation? Oh, I have 5 pythons. Maybe I'll throw them down as a distraction, like that kind of thing. It does have an appeal, whereas if you just look at Adventurer's Pack, that's not a specific prompt. That's like, I guess I have some stuff in there. But it does feel very superfluous. It kind of feels like the only real important stuff that you accumulate over the course of an adventure is going to be your magic items and like the things that require attunement and stuff like that. And the fact that they have to go in a big pile along with 50 feet of rope and a bedroll that nobody ever has to bother to use. Yeah.
So yeah, I can confirm that is a hot take, Austin, because number 2 and 3, I disagree. Like you make a good argument, and you can have that opinion, but and I think that's totally fine. In some ways, I even believe you're right. But no, I love that shit. So I can confirm
the
that
equipment or the character creation part, or which
both. I love like Red said. I look at my equipment, and it's like an improv prompt. I'm like, oh, there's so many possibilities I can do when I know the specific items that are in my inventory. And some of my favorite moments as a DM and as a player is having a character use the specific items that are in their pack in a very unique, cool way. Whenever the aha moment comes, and you do essentially like a scene from the D&D movie where they pull off a crazy heist or something. But yeah, I love that. Mostly just to confirm the point that is a hot take, because I love both of those things.
I agree. There's definitely appeal there. I think that it maybe belongs in a different game. Would be.
I think that's also fair.
Saying it.
Yeah. The thing you said about it being multiple different genres depending on levels, absolutely true though. Like I like those things because I tend to play lower level games, which confirms your point that it's like it's very different at low level.
Yeah.
It
Not
is
to go off
interesting.
in a,
I feel like
sorry, Red.
Oh, sorry. Well, one of the things I've noticed about D&D is that it feels like balance-wise, they are not entirely sure how to allow the non-spellcasters to keep up with the casters at high enough levels, because after a certain point, the bulk of the fight is just going to be 2 absolute titans of magical power counterspelling everything each other tried to do, while the characters that can't fly and can't throw fireballs are just like slowly sprinting across the battlefield so that they can unload 5 attacks per round on the wizard, assuming they don't fly up out of range. It's like, it's a tough thing to balance. The thing is, this is a tough thing to balance even at lower levels, because like the thing I noticed is that my current player and character in Rolling with Difficulty, no ranged attacks, very low mobility. There have been a couple theaters of battle where it's like it's going to take me the entire fight to get to the entire fight, and that's a funny problem to have. But again, it's a low level balance thing. You know, we don't have much in the way of things that can counter that. And that's just, the game is not really designed. It seems like 5e is trying so hard to be streamlined and, sanded down. And the end result is that it just becomes differently frustrating. And you don't even get the... And it feels like every time, it's kind of like when game designers notice a speedrunning strat that players are using and they patch it out. They're like, oh, you're not supposed to be able to do that at this level. Let's just clean that up. And it's like, but it was fun to be able to do that at this level. Why are you making this less fun for me? And that's how I felt with a lot of the changes from 3.5 to 5e. And I'm not to like continue banging that drum, but like 3.5 is far from a perfect game, but it has a lot of potential for fun bullshit, and 5e feels like it went in with intent to fix all of that, so that everyone is in roughly the same weight class. And I understand the appeal, but the end result is that you get a lot more a lot more wasted turns and a lot less potential for, can I do this with this to make some crazy thing happen? Because that's one of the most fun things for a player to lob to a DM is like, hey, I have an idea. You're going to need to tell me if I'm allowed to do it, but can I do it? And oftentimes the answer is, that sounds tight as fuck, so yes. And it feels like a lot of the game designers and like WotC are like, that's a bug, not a feature. You're not supposed to be able to find those ways to make the game go crazy. So we're just going to fix that and fix that and fix that. And it's like, no, stop fixing it. It was already beautiful the way it was.
Yeah. I have a completely different direction hot take, I guess, to like throw to round out this quartet. I play a lot of charisma-based classes. I love my bards. I love my paladins. They're my boys. Recent convert to the warlock fan train. But I think that charisma and charisma skills are the most either ignored or misused by most tables. Not because people are not attempting to persuade characters or attempting to intimidate them when they're making, when they're going about an adventure. But I think that because there's been such a turn in the game in recent years to say, like, this is kind of more of an improv exercise with some rules for combat than it is a game that is rounded out in other areas as well. There is an impulse for DMs to not call for a roll and to let the player just kind of try and actually convince their table that they are going to be persuasive or intimidate and say the words they're going to do. But I am not expected to be able to make the same strength check as my character. I should not be expected to also be able to make the same like charisma check as my character. I could play a high charisma character however much my charisma stat would be in real life. And I think it's very reasonable.
An inspiring speech.
Yes, you should be able to do that at a table at any time. I love trying to make a joke for my Tasha's Hideous Laughter, or I personally like trying to attempt the persuasion. But I think regardless of how successful the real world attempt is, you should still be calling for the roll as the DM or as a player. Say like, I'm trying to make a persuasion roll, here's how I do it. And then however much you describe is valid. And I think with the turn to the improv exercise of D&D, that gets lost in the shuffle so quickly. And it is such a shame because that is a very easy way to lose an aspect of your character that is critical when you're doing something like a bard or if you're doing a campaign that is a little bit more like city conversation based. It so quickly goes out the window. And it's such a shame.
There was a player at my parents' home game when I was younger who would usually play the face of the party, and he'd be like a witty remark, like convincing argument, that kind of thing. He wouldn't need to come up with it off the dome. And I think that ties in with how a lot of people have gotten into D&D because Critical Role got super duper popular. So they were seeing somebody's home game that was done by a crew of professional actors, and they were like, I can do that. And that's beautiful. I love that. But I think that gave people a certain standard for what the game looks like. Whereas for a while, the standard was not that you were going to get into character. You were going to do a voice. You were going to rattle off these great lines off the dome. It would be like, all right, my guy's going to go in there and hit him with his sword, and then I'm going to roll out of the way, like that kind of thing. It was a lot more my character does this and a lot less
describing your character rather than acting it out.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's great fun. A lot of my favorite actual plays are the ones that are done by crews of like actors and improv comedians and stuff like that, because those people are really good at being entertaining on camera. But the end result is that I worry you get new players and new DMs who are like, I have to match this style. I have to be able to do a panoply of voices for all these characters, and I have to have the Shakespearean levels of monologues ready off the dome. And that's a fun thing to strive for, but it shouldn't be like a prerequisite for playing pretend for grown-ups with dice. Yeah. I'm agreeing, but with more words, I guess.
Indigo, you talking about charisma and persuasion reminded me of another hot take that I have.
Yes, I knew it. I knew this was going to happen. Hot takes always
it's the hot take domino setup. Yeah.
And I know it's a hot take because I know that a lot of people, including a lot of bards and paladins, are going to be very upset at this.
Ooh.
I believe persuasion should not be a skill. I believe instead you should have to roll whatever skill that is associated with that topic. And those of you who have played Fallout New Vegas know exactly what I'm talking about. Like if you're talking to a wizard and trying to convince the wizard of wizard things, you should roll an Arcana to show that you know what you're talking about.
I like that.
If you're talking to a farmer and you need to convince them something having to do with their farm, you should roll a nature check or a survival check. And I believe charisma instead should be a passive that goes on top of that like shows how good you are at arguing your case.
Could be one of those classic use cases of the replace what the base stat is. So it suggests, I think people assume this is a rule, but there's a suggestion of what it should be. For example, athletics parentheses strength. That people assume it must be strength, but no, it's if you have proficiency, and then the GM should call for whatever the skill is, and most of the time athletics is going to be strength. But I really like that, the idea that persuasions are, okay, it's a charisma check, let's check and see if the appropriate skill you're proficient in. So it is your charisma. If you're a great orator, then yes, you are going to be better at this than someone who is very, very bad at that. But if you know nothing about nature, you're going to have a hard time convincing the farmer, as you said. I think that's it's really great. It's one of the that might be the best thing I've heard, the best fresh thing I've heard about D&D in a little while, actually. I like that.
And I love persuasion. I love playing a high charisma character. My favorite class is a bard. I always love taking talky skills in any RPG. I believe it's too strong sometimes when it's all lumped into an umbrella persuasion skill.
Yeah.
And it really also means that characters that are maybe not good at talking but really know about one topic suddenly are just bad at talking about that topic. And I feel as though more DMs need to use non-persuasion skills for persuasion.
I think I'm actually probably going to try that out.
Yeah. I think this kind of gets to maybe, because we're coming up on time here, so we need to
I know.
umbrella this a little bit, but to like get a kind of like final piece of advice, if I could, for the podcast, like, and for people listening, of course, you can always call for the roll that you want to make and ask the DM, can I make this as a nature check because I am an expert in this type of farming, or can I make this as can I do acrobatics instead of athletics because my character is, adept at doing backflips, but maybe not the strongest. Like it is always okay for you to ask your DM, can I do this? This is why I think I can do this. And it's up to them to make the ruling either way, but you as the player are an active participant in the rulebook, and you can always know those rules, know what's on your sheet, and say, hey, what about blank? It is not your DM's responsibility to say, here's the most optimal way for you to use your character. That is on you, and it is always okay to do this collaboratively, because at the end of the day, this is a collaborative game.
Agreed.
I wish I could have like a half hour more on this subject, because I think I have great mechanical ones. I have great ones about the rules of the game, but to put a period on my own hot takes and to circle to what Red says, this is a deeply held belief of mine regarding actual plays. My hot take is that actual plays are a double-edged sword. More people are playing the game now than ever, which is awesome. And for that reason, we have to thank actual plays, because Critical Role and the Adventure Zone are absolutely the godparents of this current boom of the game. They would not be like this without them. Counterpoint, extremely popular actual plays homogenize the game ecosystem, and people assume that the game is played this way instead of learning it from their tables. I always think of like so you can track sloth genealogy not just by the genetics of the sloth from the mother to the baby, but from the genetics of the algae, because the baby hangs on to the mother and gains the algae that was growing on her, so there's relatability between the algae. And I always think of like, that used to be the way it was. These tables would have this they would pass their own beliefs and their own the way
style.
They played the game, the style, thank you, the style onto the next table as players became GMs for new tables, and this would mix with new players and their own ideas, and you could kind of track this lineage. And now it's like, we all have one parent. We all have one parent. It's Critical Role, and that's where everyone
I was wondering
comes
where
from,
you were going with that. I was like,
Yeah.
what does this have to do with
This
sloths?
is a great example
Okay, that makes
of
a lot more
Austin
sense as an
using a
allegory.
check, using his nature ability.
Using my
as
nature.
opposed to-
I see. Yeah, it
That's
all ties
inspiration
together.
worthy,
Wow.
Sophia.
Genius.
Good job.
Thank you. I'm
So
gonna
anyway,
hold you to that.
yeah, it used to be that you could track these individual genealogies, and now there's just one parent. There is Critical Role, and good, like it or not, we all have the genetics of Critical Role in our actual plays, and you're either embracing it or you're trying to fight it, but in some way you are recognizing that ubiquity.
Yep.
Yeah. But I also don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because
Well,
it was like...
it doesn't have to be, yeah.
Yeah.
It
But also,
cuts
like,
both ways, as I said.
Yeah, and it was known for years that, like, one of the hardest things to do was, like, you had a really cool thing happen at your home table. You had a really important fight, and you're trying to explain this to somebody who's never played a game of D&D before in their life, and you're like, okay, you gotta understand, this is the guy who burned my village down in my tragic backstory. Like, we established this 3 years ago, and then, like, the last time we fought, I rolled a crit fail at the last minute, and he got away, but this time I rolled a nat 20, and they're like, and what does that mean? And for me, the benefit of actual plays is that you don't need to explain. You can just be like, hey man, listen to 100 straight hours of my podcast and you'll understand. This was really cool, actually.
Sell. Speaking of, listen to 100 straight hours of our podcast.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And also Heart of Elynthi. This is the shameless plug section for Heart of Elynthi and Rolling with Difficulty. These are both actual plays that you could consume hundreds of straight hours of.
The perfect segue.
The power is yours.
You're telling me that this D&D session ran long because we all had too many ideas?
I don't know any other way to do it.
Well, needless to say, I think part of the conversation that gets lost a little bit too is like playing a game at your home table and listening to an actual play are two different things. Like, you know, it's still very difficult for me to explain, hey, this fun thing happened at my home game to anyone I meet in the world, but like, you know, someone listens to Rolling Difficulty, they know what I'm talking about because it's a story they're consuming as opposed to a story they're participating in. But this is a story that we've all been participating in over the course of what is now the runtime of this podcast, and that means that Red, I have to ask you...
This is the story of a girl.
This is the story of a girl, specifically of Red doing the outro. Now, you can make if you can justify it to me, you can make any kind of check you want to accomplish this outro, but you do still have to roll for it.
Well, boss, I would really love it if it was an insight check on account of, I think that I would just like to get a read on, you know, my fellow podcast participants and how they're feeling about it. The audience at home cannot see Austin flipping me double birds right now. The day I stop playing an insight-heavy character is the day I die. Thank you all so much for listening to this fun bonus episode of the Overly Sarcastic Podcast. We'll be back at some point, probably within the next 2 weeks, with a more normal episode. And also, Heart of Elynthi and Rolling with Difficulty are both happening at various different paces.
They sure are.
I wasn't prepped for this part.
Everything will be linked down in the show notes below, so if you want to listen to either of those two other shows, you can find them there. And that was the help action, so you gotta pick. Now you have advantage to continue this dumpster fire.
But it's counterbalanced by the fact that I was rolling with difficulty this whole time. And thank you to our lovely guests. If you would like to, we just explained what podcast you guys do, but if you want to do any sort of self-promo, please feel free to. Save me from myself.
I'm JoCat. You can find me everywhere at JoCat. Yes. I have my own website, jocat.net, that I made myself. I'm very proud of it.
Nice.
You can mostly find me on Rolling with Difficulty affiliated things, listening to the podcast or joining our Discord. I am often hanging out in there with a lot of other cool people, so talk to those cool people, and occasionally I also crash that party. If you want to occasionally see something I was thinking about, I am on the X and the BlueSky.
It's
at
still Twitter.
the Funk. My name is Austin Funk. Austin T Funk, so it's at the Funk. It was clever what it was come up with, and every time I've had to explain it, I realized what a blunder it was.
Yeah.
Thank you for bearing with me.
Oh, good.
Excellent.
Cool. All right. I think that's everything we had to take care of, yes?
Session complete.
Yeah, I think so.
Amazing. All right. Well, this has been an overly sarcastic podcast. Thank you all so much for
Nat
joining.
one right at the end.
We can stop making fun of me anytime and it would be fine.
No. Thanks so much for listening to this very special Oops All Dungeons & Dragons bonus episode of the Overly Sarcastic Podcast. Regular episodes will resume on October 30th, but if you have any questions for the podcast before then, you can head over to Ask OSPod on Discord for a chance to be featured in a future episode. If you enjoyed the show, please rate us and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform, and if you really enjoyed the show, consider becoming a patron for even more exclusive benefits. And of course, a special thank you to our guests Austin and JoCat. Be sure to check out Rolling with Difficulty and Heart of Elynthi for some actual play goodness. Thanks for listening.